Greetings and bienvenue, MITZU. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
The progenitors. There was a time when all humanity was working together. We had technology that interfaced seamlessly with nature, long lives and huge urban societies that make modern cities look like villages. This is the time many cultures describe before the ancient era, when giants walked the earth and beings from other worlds exchanged goods and wisdom with humans. These relationships led humans to discoveries about the fundamental nature of the cosmos and consciousness itself, allowing them to manipulate the natural world through a system of chemical, social, biological, and physical processes. Ancient man could distort reality using a combination of technology and consciousness, allowing him to manifest things beyond comprehension. Suffice to say, the capabilities of ancient man would look like magic to us today. If the sayers are right, this period of harmony happened between 10,000 and 35,000 years ago, but may have continued long before in a deep forgotten past. The entirety of modern history is a twisted attempt at concealing this truth, something it has done with considerable success. The signs of past achievement are literally right in front of us, yet all of modern science, philosophy, and theology have been interfered with in order to make us believe disharmony is the default state of humanity. There are monuments to the harmonious nature of our existence all around us, but they are hidden by constant assurances of our own apathy. Unignorable proof of our past has been hidden in plain sight. Those with interests in keeping humanity mundane have realized the truth doesn't need to be hidden if you can be convinced this is all as nature, science, and God have prescribed. Systems of consciousness use layered harmonic patterns to perform both computational and energy management tasks. In computational terms, frequencies establish order of operations for logic. In energetic terms, frequency interference allows energy to take on modalities that influence the electromagnetic spectrum in different ways. These systems are not solely in human beings, but the universe itself also features these characteristics as they seem to be intrinsic to all matter and energy. When human beings are working at their full potential, they are capable of both interacting with and exchanging with the energetic systems that unify time and space and allow deterministic events to occur at all scales. This means humans are part of an ecosystem, which allows human will to exert itself across cosmic distances without violating physical laws. Conscious will is common to all matter, and thus everything around us is both our creation and responsible for creating us simultaneously. Other conscious beings in nature are also aware of their connection to the prana, or chi, that allows all things to exist. But they can only communicate through this energy when the receiver is tuned to the natural frequencies we were designed for. These frequencies are not secret. They are represented in the thresholds of each brainwave activity type, and also as a standing wave traversing the Earth's surface. The Schumann resonances.
Collective conscious or unconscious?
Prana, or chi. The context may change the terms, but the meaning is the same. The universe itself is a substrate upon which consciousness is exerted. This substrate propagates consciousness to the extent of being indistinguishable from it. This reality is found universally in all structures of idealization or physics. It can be developed as a material art, allowing matter to be influenced, or it can be developed as an extension of consciousness into the symmetrical nature of broader reality. Reality is defined by the presence or absence of consciousness and varying intervals. This is why theoretical physicists often discuss the possibility all physical reality is created by small perturbations on the surfaces of black holes. Everything can be traced to amplitude, vibration, the presence or absence of consciousness. Holographic theories also rest on this axiom. Our current scientific models have haphazardly assigned electromagnetism as the token term for this realm, but this is totally insufficient as it exists now. Applying this knowledge is the reason civilizations don't build Dyson swarms and warp gate networks. The fabric of reality can be understood and can be manipulated using biology. This would explain as well the philosophical implications of the universe being tailor-made to support life like us.
Cool. Any substance to the idea that DNA is antenna-shaped?
DNA is microscopic enough to have a lot of unusual effects. It is a hetero-nanostructure, so it interacts with quantum properties and can theoretically leverage Casimir effects, to name one example. The only problem with the DNA as an EMF antenna idea is that any structure with a broad set of properties will also act like an EMF antenna in a sufficiently large energetic system. A person standing on the surface of the Earth is an antenna relative to the Earth. A hair on the body is an antenna relative to the body. DNA molecules are an antenna relative to the disordered intracellular fluid. I would note that superconducting behavior in nanomaterials is contingent on relative orientation of crystalline structures. Certain angles can allow a material to superconduct, and theoretically DNA might have some related effect due to its cross-sectional symmetry. Unfortunately, I have not researched this aspect.
Do you think Atlantis existed? Was it one of the gods' cities?
The Atlantis the Egyptians and Greeks spoke of was most likely one of the efforts to re-establish the much older legacy civilization, considering it was relatively recent, most likely around 10 to 13,000 years ago. It seems reasonable to me that one of the reasons Atlantis was so revered in its time is that it was created as part of the effort to return to the old system of unity. It was most likely built on top of a much older city with roots to the original progenitor culture, just like the other well-known necropolises. The culture was global, and it's likely the actual city of Atlantis would have been emulated in other locations as well. So, even if we identify the city, we should consider the possibility that there were multiple cities designed in a common image. A cultural iconography and set of values rather than a distinct location or set of locations.
Is there any recent work done on recovering the tech that is available for us plebes?
The answer really depends on how far into a technical perspective you are willing to go. Tesla was the last person to apply the scale necessary for the Earth-atmosphere circuit concept. The ancients understood that large amounts of energy could be obtained by bridging charge gradients between locations on the Earth's surface, as well as between the Earth and ionosphere. Radioactive materials or microwave energy can dissociate air to create a conductive volume. Certain geometries can assist collection of energy. Pyramids and obelisks are the ideal shape in electrical terms. As far as modern efforts go, a lot of these ideas either don't scale down well or are basically ignored because they are pitched in the context of free energy or anti-gravity, which are categorically blacklisted topics in science. Others are military technologies like time-reverse wave interferometry and cross-beam over-the-horizon radar. These are very important, but mostly secretive. If you are able to digest white papers, there are a lot more avenues that intersect with this tech. Fusion in solid materials and fluids, lattice confinement fusion and cavitation generators are of great interest.
This is fascinating. I hadn't heard of any of these concepts. Can you elaborate on the Earth-atmosphere circuit concept? What are the implications of the backwards time light wave? I'm reading that it could produce extremely intense radiation waves.
The concept is very simple. The ionosphere is negatively charged from cosmic radiation. The Earth is positively charged from geologic effects. We already know lightning occurs when low resistance regions exist between these two charge potentials. Technically, the interactions between these two electrodes are bound by other phenomenon, like microscopic variations in gravitational waves and resonances in the atmosphere, Schumann resonances, but you can simplify this system for the sake of argument. It is very easy to tap into the potential by manipulating one of a number of conditions. These potentials also exist between different locations on Earth, but for now just consider the Earth-ionosphere relationship. You can think of the entire planet as a Leyden jar. When lightning strikes, a column of ionized air forms where the electricity will arc. Tesla experimented with using balloons with radioactive skins and tethers to produce ionized air at altitude to provoke discharge. He also discussed using particle streams and various types of directional radiation to ionize the atmosphere. Now we get to the obvious question. How would the ancients have done it? If you have studied electrical engineering, you know electromagnetism is strongest when electrons change direction. This is why coils are used for electromagnets and why a crimped wire generates noise. A large shape with a tapering point is the ideal form to attract electrical discharges, lightning rods, and some geometries can even propagate this energy in stable configurations. The most obvious is the pyramid. A pyramid has the added benefit of being able to deflect radiation directly upwards. This means you can produce a column of microwave energy by reflecting low-frequency radiation sources off the sides of the pyramid, or from within. A microwave beam will ionize the air easily and would produce a constant flow of electrons into the peak of the pyramid.
Probably the best and most reasonable explanation I have ever read.
People tend to get confused by the fact that pyramids had multiple functions. It is very likely they were used as power collectors, chemical refineries, and to produce water pressure. They also most likely had significance as healing and consciousness-altering tools. This idea of a single structure having so many interrelated functions is at odds with modern compartmentalized science. However, we see this design philosophy across ancient technological structures. The Barabar caves in OP Post are another unignorable example. What are the implications of the backwards time light wave? I never replied to this. The scientific literature on time-reversed waves is sparse, but what we do know is pretty interesting. If you read about this phenomenon online, sources will say explicitly that you cannot produce more energy in the time-reversed signal than you put in. Technically, this is true, but it is misleading. Outside of laboratories, the only time these time-reversed waves are used is in phased array radar. This type of radar has two operating modes, cross-beam over the horizon and cross-beam ground mode. The former bounces signals off the atmosphere and generates a time-reversed interference pattern when beams from two different arrays cross. The latter is similar, but signals travel through the Earth's crust instead, which gives the benefit of virtually zero signal loss. This is simply because the Earth has subtle low-frequency vibrations that can become carrier signals for man-made waves. Sound familiar? Again, we find a Tesla connection. So what all this means is we have a method to dump the entire energy potential of 2 times 100 plus square meter phased arrays at a single remote point in space with an arbitrary direction in time and space. This allows you to produce energy densities that can vaporize objects. It also allows you to produce energetic regions that can be controlled by modulating the signal. What would a time-reversed energy anomaly look like? An orb of light that appears to travel in an intelligent manner. The defense applications of this include being able to steer volumes of energy into missiles or ground targets, or generating a bubble of energy like a shield. Remember that the energy can be made to travel in a time-arbitrary direction, so you can pick an object and bounce enormous amounts of energy around it without harming the object itself.
Crazy to think how little would survive without constant upkeep after only a few thousand years. Living beings are the only thing that can go for periods this long unchanged, which is quite interesting. We have minute lifespans, yet our ideas and motivations can remain virtually static across geologic timescales. In 10,000 years, New York City will be a wetland again. The only thing that survives will be mummified bodies and microscopic traces of metal. Yet, humans will most likely have a memory of that place where the reality of what it was will live on. Our modern histories are full of stories of glimmering cities and vast, powerful civilizations, all relegated to myth or religious idealization. Unfortunately, the human mind and memory are also malleable from one generation to the next, which is why it's important to remember what's real and what isn't.
No, Anon. We were not godlike before. As a species, we have never been in balance with nature. Ever since we came about, even during our most primitive stages, we have been killing off other species of flora and fauna as we migrate through this planet. From the start, everywhere we went, we drove species to extinction. Techniques and skills have been lost, but we have never possessed the ability to exert our will upon our world except through labor. Technology certainly does not achieve this. We have never worked together. We have never been in harmony with nature. We have always exploited it for our survival to the detriment of the ecosystem we inhabit at the time. You can argue that it seems some manufacturing techniques have been lost to time, But all the assertions above within this paragraph and before this sentence are fanciful ideation. Only through hard work can we achieve anything, and it's a zero-sum game. There's only so much of everything. We are not dormant gods who could change reality through wishes.
Everything you just said is purely ideological. You clearly have not researched any of the points you are trying to make, or else you would understand how weak the arguments are. The entire narrative of man-hunting megafauna to extinction is a total fabrication, and this is obvious with a modicum of research. It is done purely for convenience to explain recent mass extinction events and also paint mankind as bumbling lunatics. At the height of the woolly mammoth population in North America, there were over 3 mammoths per person, not per family, per individual human across the entire continent. If we hunted these animals to extinction, plus a dozen other megafauna species like saber-toothed cats and 2-plus-ton ground sloths, then why do we find the remains of them in massive quantities in runoff plains? Clearly a major singular cataclysmic event caused their die-off, but that idea was not accepted when anthropology formed their beliefs. It is now, but the poorly supported conclusion is still pushed. In fact, the entire premise is supported by a single arrowhead found in a mammoth skeleton. That's it. The whole theory comes from that single object. Again, if you looked at the evidence instead of parroting, you'd know this is totally illogical. Human hunter-gatherer groups varied in size, but for a long time anthropologists thought the maximum group size was around 150 people. 60 women, 60 juveniles, 30 males. If humans fought over resources, all they had to do to destroy an enemy tribe would be attack with all their males when the enemy's males are out hunting and slaughter the juveniles and women. This would be unavoidable. The victim group would then counterattack and either die out or force the aggressor group into the same predicament. So you run into the problem of not having a model for conflict resolution in ancient man. If violence happened, chances are it would have destroyed both groups' female and juvenile population and caused them to disband. There is no evidence of warfare at any point in our deep past. Arrowheads are for making animals bleed out, not stopping men in their tracks. The oldest battlefields are all in recent history. There is a reason warfare is considered an art. It requires massive social and crafting specializations. It simply does not make sense to develop this capability in such small groups as hunter-gatherers are purported to have existed in. Also, if mankind were inherently warlike, why do we not have any physical adaptations for fighting? Why is the human body designed to interlock with another body in love instead of being built for combat? Why are we trusting by default instead of paranoid? There is no evidence for your claims. They are pure academic nihilism and are even more outdated now than they were in the 1970s when these ideas were introduced.
Anon, I agree with your takes on catastrophism and megafauna, but this just isn't true. There is indeed sporadic archaeological evidence of intergroup violence, but the most compelling evidence comes from uncontacted primitive cultures and comparative biology. We see intergroup violence attested there, and intragroup violence is even more commonplace. Like other social primates, there is a propensity to engage in intergroup violence when there's competition over resources or territory. That said, I would agree that the advent of warfare was indeed primarily a psychological cultural phenomenon, and shy away from any killer ape theory which emphasizes it. This is silly. Just because evolution has a vaguely teleological dimension does not mean you can infer from the physiognomy of humans that there was no warfare in our deep past. The brain has always been our primary weapon, and tool use came early enough in our history, and was obviously effective enough. That our lacking more physically focused adaptations tells us nothing. It could be that the pressure was towards better social dispositions, higher intelligence, more curiosity and novelty, etc., and this was determinative over. It could also be that intergroup conflict was relatively uncommon but still present, but you can hardly infer its absence like you have. Which killer ape theory emphasizes war's positive attributes, and this was determinative over physical adaptations. War is a curse passed down from on high, but it was the industrial scale and nature of war that marks it out as a civilizational achievement. Violence existed in pre-modern cultures, organized violence even. It was just relatively more restrained in scale and scope, and Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, and revealed to them the metals of the earth and how to work with them. as well as how to make bracelets, ornaments, and the use antimony, beautifying the eyelids along with all kinds of precious stones and various dyes. 1 Enoch 8, 1. We are in fact paranoid by default, and we see this manifest in the form of a credibility bias in social learning. Look into the recent developments in credibility-enhancing displays, CREDs, which emerged out of signaling theory but is properly an epistemological bias. Deception is endemic in human social interactions, and has been since we mastered language, thus allowing very cheap methods of furnishing false information. It's theorized this is the explanation for the demonstrable bias we have towards adopting the beliefs of people who practice what they preach, and this works as a game-theoretic model for costly practices, like sacrifices and even martyrdom. Just because you say blueberries are safe to eat, doesn't mean I'll believe you. But when I watch you eat blueberries, I am more likely to adopt your belief that they are safe to eat. Likewise, witnessing a learning model engage in sacrifice, martyrdom, or costly practice reinforces a neutral learner's disposition to adopt the beliefs associated with the corresponding practice. This is the social energy behind restrictive and costly beliefs. Beliefs embedded with costly practices are actually expected to fare better, all else being equal, and this is borne out empirically.
It's important to identify the distinction between violence and warfare. Violence can certainly arise within and between tribal groups. I also do not think you are in the right time frame in your considerations. On killer ape theory, I think we actually agree on. I'll be more specific. The art of war involves preparing a man and his culture for a lifestyle of sacrifice. Those sacrifices are not just felt by the individual, but by the whole society. Men are an extremely vital resource in tribal society, and demanding a portion of your most valuable group spend their entire lives becoming warriors is very difficult to rationalize. The end goal of this process is always to produce a fighter that is more effective than a normal man. A warrior can kill 3 or 5 or 10 normal men before dying. In non-warfare, violence exchanges are usually 1-to-1. The oldest cultures did not make weapons. They did not deify warriors. That all started within the last 10,000 years. The oldest battlefields known to archaeology are no older than 6500 BC. Obviously, there are much older battles recorded in various histories, to the extent that warfare likely took place as long ago as 9000 BC. The issue I see with our discussion is that this thread is about the progenitors. We are effectively extrapolating our ancient prehistory, the transition from tribal violence to warfare that compounded with the growth of civilization, to a period much deeper in the past that would explain the physiology of the beings who were our progenitors as well as ourselves. Obviously, there is the issue that the progenitors were almost certainly comprised of numerous different hominids. Modern humans are only a section of this population group, but we can ignore this for the sake of argument if we are willing to ignore evolutionary or genetic influences. More to the point, we have to realize there is a duality in the progress of humans. At every moment in history, from the dawn of our most recent civilization to today's modern technological humans, virtually an entire new species, the most advanced human civilizations have existed alongside tribal groups. So if we see violence in these groups, we tend to assume we are witnessing a kind of proto-warfare. I am dubious that warfare is a requirement at all, but instead a tool of manipulation that has been refined for much longer than 10,000 years and merely taught to humans. Indeed, our oral histories always describe warfare being taught to us as you have illustrated. I would argue that your conclusion is not complete. In 100 situations where conflict is possible, modern humans will cooperate 99 times. As society becomes more complex and the stakes for every action rise, the minority of conflicts grow to have a disproportionate effect on society. Does not mean you can infer from the physiognomy of humans that there was no warfare in our deep past. It indicates a lifestyle where conflict avoidance is used in favor of confrontation. Sure, humans scrutinize each other for potential threats, but they do it face to face, not at a distance as they stalk each other. Look at any predatory animals that are frequently predated. Animals that use confrontation to resolve conflict, whether they are predators or prey, have sharp teeth that regrow, claws, thick hides, arteries close to the bone, camouflage, a body structure that is designed for speed or climbing to evade and pursue. Humans have nothing. We are the polar opposite. We rely on intellect to avoid and diffuse situations. But if we are forced into conflict, our odds of survival are almost always equal to our odds of mortal injury. We are simply not designed like the other animals on Earth in survival terms. The specializations humans possess that can aid us in conflict are a short list. It's basically just hearing, vocalization, and a white sclera for inferring where people are looking. Anthropologists actually argue our complex speech capability arose from hunting. This is another example of a very biased conclusion that ignores the massive social significance of speech, which is something we've clearly been using for 100,000 of years.
This is assuming a lot which we are not entitled to assume. First of all, if we're talking about animals getting into fights, the survival chances may be lower than you suggest. Further, the absence of these things are just as plausibly explained by tool use and human social behavior. We have an underdeveloped muscular ability to move our ears because we were, from some point in our deep past, eusocial creatures. But the very nature of human social behavior may have been such. Leaving aside the point about hunting, which I actually somewhat agree with, my point here is that there could just have easily been group selection pressures selecting for things other than what you propose, even stuff like domestication, neoteny, and passive intra-group behavior, because those were the best group-wide adaptations. It bears mentioning here that we are only beginning to unravel group selection, and the science is in a dismal state. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for questioning the anthropological orthodoxy, but we should still be trying for rigor. Modern humans will cooperate 99 times. This is pretty much what I'm suggesting. I just don't think it leads to the same conclusions as you do.
I would define warfare as simply organized collective violence. And to the extent that we see such behavior in intelligence primates and primitive societies, I suspect that the propensity is very old in our history. I also do not think you are in the right time frame in your considerations. Obviously, there are much older battles. Warfare likely took place as long ago as 9000 BC. I think we actually agree on the time frame to a large extent. I would readily concede that warfare in the terms of large-scale organized violence with industrial technologies is a late feature associated with civilizational development from about 10,000 BC onwards. My suggestion is that 1. It is likely large-scale collective violence occurred with some frequency in deep history, though the exact frequency remains to be determined, and 2. The advent of industrial or civilizational methods of warfare, including ancient metallurgy, the working of bronze iron, and even psychotech-like cosmetics, though it occurred within the last 10K years, was substantially, if not primarily, a technological innovation, which no doubt interacted with culture by propagating certain cultures and not others, but did not create intergroup violence. I concede that technological progress is not independent from cultural changes, but suspect that predisposition to intergroup conflict was present to some degree, such that technology merely allowed for the unleashing of previously withheld destructive tendencies. Think of humanity before and after discovering nukes. They probably would have been fired off by many groups throughout history had they the technology. The existence of a warrior class does not equal evidence of organized warfare, and neither is the existence of organized warfare dependent upon a dedicated warrior class, though it is, as your argument picks up on, a fairly good indicator where it exists. Warfare as a social technology does not require a warrior class when it can be introduced via culture-wide technological innovations. Think, for instance, of the historical dominance of grain-based cultures over rice-based cultures. We see grain-based cultures win out over rice-based cultures because being able to mobilize that huge percentage of your population who must remain farmers during off-season beats out the advantage of a professional military. This is the reason what are today the poorer regions of China and India, which were grain-based societies in the Central Plains, enjoyed a historic political dominance over their tropical rice-farming neighbors that they've retained to a large degree even today. I don't suggest this force to be determinative. The dynamic of warfare, unlike its nature, definitely changes with technology. My point is simply that the proposed indicator does not seem reliable.
I think this is the major point where we disagree. Considering the complexity of anthropology and the requirement for many assumptions to be made, it is natural for two people with detailed attitudes to reach varying conclusions. I would also add, while I have not discussed it here, I am extremely interested in military history and the psychology of war. I think this lens has some context not normally applied to anthropology. This will always be an interesting debate. Nuclear power is not an optional technology for life like us, but is almost unavoidable. Few people are aware of the natural fission reactors in Gabon. These are areas underground where natural uranium existed in concentrations necessary for sustained fission to occur in the past. And interestingly, this location is also where some of the oldest traces of multicellular life have been found. This highlights how harnessing fission for thermal power generation is literally as simple as piling up raw natural uranium ore in a pile. It's easy to imagine the emergence of nuclear power across history in instances where industry is extremely basic, either intentionally or by accident. Weaponization of fission is obviously much more difficult, but still can be achieved without many of the technologies we used in our epoch. Anyway, the point is that fission is a relatively low rung for civilizations to climb. Weaponization is not an obvious step, even after mastering fission. I think this underscores our current attitudes and tendencies as a society that embraces war to the point of deification. There could just have easily been group selection pressures selecting for things other than what you propose. A rational point, of course. But the issue in my mind is that humans have existed with our current physiology for such a long time. I would expect evolutionary pressures to present more obvious adaptations if we really spent such long periods in adversarial conditions with each other. While Darwinian evolution is obviously a highly simplified and flawed idea, it does illustrate how specialization can occur over very short timescales in response to unique pressures. I find this at odds with the legacy of Homo sapiens and their official chronology. Humans survived massive shifts in climate and watched the flora and fauna around them evolve dramatically while we remained virtually unchanged. One's explanation for why this is the case, which also fits the progenitor theory as stated here, is that humans were not subject to the same evolutionary pressures for the past 300,000 years, and in fact were able to sustain their genetics intentionally. I do not think it is rational to assume man did not understand the benefits offered by the unique physiology we possess, and if they had any level of high technology, these traits would have been preserved and protected. Many of these ideas are diametrically opposed to the notion of conflict ever winning out over preservation and security of the species, both in terms of society and also our unique genetic makeup.
Do you think these stones quarried or cured?
Both technologies were used. First, recognize that geopolymers are not concrete. Even the dynastic Egyptians had concrete. Geopolymers require specific pressures and temperatures to recrystallize a concoction of fine particulate blend of silicate and organic matter. Geopolymers can also include ferromagnetic materials, allowing them to act as artificial magnets. In the case of the Khufu pyramid complex, as is hotly debated along these lines, we can see concrete and quarried rock. The case for geopolymer is weaker. However, in sites like Puma Punku in South America, the case for complex geopolymer is almost irrefutable. The considerations for which approach to use involved what materials were available and in what quantities, as well as what kind of industrial capacity was available in each region. The science behind how these structures were built was universal, but the resources available were not.
Can you think of any other situations in which standing waves have sufficient duration to somatically congregate the dense material of the wave medium and said standing waves trough without any form of external constriction on the wave field that isn't a laminar flow state?
Humans are able to determine the temperature of water based on the sounds it makes when splashing, so this idea of laminar flow being a highly efficient intermediate for transmission of acoustic energy is definitely important. If we approach water flow as an information-dense system, we realize it can be used to encode information and thus communicate information about the environment it is flowing through. Water's unique properties allow many effects in biology that seem highly advanced, but are tailored for communication. Plants communicate by causing cavitation in their xylem phloem, which is converted into acoustic energy. Humans are highly complex wetware computers that use many crystallization and quantum, Casimir effects mostly in academic terms, effects to interface with reality. The significance of flowing water is universal to human beings, as if the sounds it makes are a language we can all speak but have forgotten.
Right, to add to this, a singular body of water is basically the fluid equivalent of a single crystalline crystal, where the whole molecular body has a singular valence shell. And it seems the hinged nature of the H2O atoms is able to convert the dissipating energy of analytic wave propagation into a functional articulation of said hinge, adding yet another very long-lasting information storage vector to any waves that pass through said body of water.
Good point about the polar nature of water. It is clearly a powerful and unique property. I would infer water is an effective communication conduit for consciousness. So does this only strengthen the idea that consciousness itself is rooted in electromagnetism? Water is both polar and diamagnetic while interfacing with acoustics as well. It might also have a time-dependent component, allowing it to be a conduit in time. I can't help but think of Da Vinci's obsession with illustrating water flowing around objects. I have recently become very interested in the diamagnetic and polar properties. It's interesting that they are so rarely applied, outside of military tech, when the principles are so simple. We all learn in school that water interacts with electrical fields, but the curriculum stops short of showing you water also interacts with magnetic fields until you are in a Physics 347 graduate class learning about magnetohydrodynamics. It also explains why underground water sources are so vital in progenitor technology. We know every single important site is located above aquifers or underground streams. Tapping into the energy these things produces can be done at a variety of scales and is the basis of dowsing, as well as certain Tesla technologies. Tesla wanted to bury large sheets of copper to mimic groundwater in his experiments. Interestingly, phased array radar systems that operate in a ground wave mode, where they send signals through the crust instead of bouncing them off the ionosphere, rely on large areas of buried metal to conduct the signals and aid propagation. It really is incredible when you realize this technology has been hidden in plain sight and subjugated by military entities.
If you had to speculate, do you suppose such sites were chosen for those qualities? Or that those qualities were constructed into the sites?
It depends on the site. Some of the Egyptian complexes have man-made water distribution channels deep underground that have not been seen since they were built. The Osirion and Giza complex both have these water systems. However, both sites are built on aquifers as well. Aquifers are common enough that in most places, mountainous areas tend to be the only places aquifers are rare. You can dig deeper and eventually find one. The issue then becomes trying to transport that water towards the surface without bringing silt and sand with it. That is most likely the function of the man-made systems. It's interesting that many sites built on shallow aquifers do not actually penetrate the aquifer. An aquifer is basically a mass of porous rock that water seeps up through, pressurized by geologic forces from below. So if you dig into one, water will slowly seep out until the hole fills and overflows. So perhaps the motion of water is not the only important aspect. The composition of aquifers, water-impregnated amorphous crystal aggregate, may also be important.
As previously stated, there could just have easily been group selection pressures selecting for things other than what you propose. A rational point, of course, but the issue in my mind is that humans have existed with our current physiology for such a long time. I would expect evolutionary pressures to present more obvious adaptations if we really spent such long periods in adversarial conditions with each other. While Darwinian evolution is obviously a highly simplified and flawed idea, it does illustrate how specialization can occur over very short timescales in response to unique pressures. I find this at odds with the legacy of Homo sapiens and their official chronology. Humans survived massive shifts in climate and watched the flora and fauna around them evolve dramatically, while we remained virtually unchanged. One explanation for why this is the case, which also fits the progenitor theory as stated here, is that humans were not subject to the same evolutionary pressures for the past 300,000 years and in fact were able to sustain their genetics intentionally. I do not think it is rational to assume man did not understand the benefits offered by the unique physiology we possess. And if they had any level of high technology, these traits would have been preserved and protected. Many of these ideas are diametrically opposed to the notion of conflict ever winning out over preservation and security of the species, both in terms of society and also our unique genetic makeup. Diet is probably the most relevant aspect of lifestyle relative to this thread. It's not really appropriate to make recommendations here, but we can make assessments of the legacy of how humans fed themselves. As mentioned before, human biology has remained unchanged for approximately 300,000 years. Considering the defining role of metabolism in digestion, it is clear we have applied a consistent lifestyle for most of our history. It does not make sense to think we would still be struggling to find the optimum diet after this long. Appraising what that diet consists of, therefore, becomes trying to find the most diverse and ancient methods of food preparation. Brominated flour is highly unhealthy compared to iodine-treated flour, but this decision is not really ours to make in modern society. Cultured foods are extremely important. Cultured vegetables and grains can remove all of the negative health effects of otherwise mildly toxic foods. Legumes are probably the best true convenience food for humans that you could actually live on permanently. But protein is an easy second, with fruit coming after. Humans can process meat and fruit very readily, but in the long term, this diet is unsustainable alone. A complex carbohydrate source is also needed, but usually requires some chemical process to make a grain edible, either nixtamalized corn, rice, or leavened unbrominated flour. Fermentation of legumes have also historically filled this need, though this is not always ideal.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.